The rain hammered the canopy, a frantic drumming that almost drowned the screaming static in her helmet. "Repeat, Cass! We are danger close! Pinned down, heavy machine gun, estimating. Cliffside bunker, 209er. Captain Eva Tempest Rostova gripped the stick. Her knuckles were white, slick inside her gloves. The A-10 bucked, fighting the wind sheer of the monsoon. Below there was nothing, just an impenetrable gray wall of water sluicing over the valleys of Helmand Province. "Hog 01, solid copy. I have 0 viz on your pose," she transmitted, her voice shockingly calm, a betrayal of the knot in her stomach. "Tempest, you cannot engage." The JTAC, call sign Trident, sounded desperate. "You can't see us. RO forbids blind engagement. Abort! Abort!" "Trident, I don't need to see you," Eva cut in. The altimeter unwound. 800 feet, 700. The gray void rushed up. "I know where the rain isn't." She saw it. Not with her eyes, but on the radar. A subtle, fractional change in the Doppler return. A solid mass where the downpour was being blocked. A rain shadow. 209er. Her thumb moved to the trigger, the plastic cold and final. Hog 01, visual, in hot. The world dissolved into the sound of the gun. 96 hours earlier, Kandahar Airfield Operations Briefing Room. The air in the briefing room was thick with the smell of stale coffee, dust, and the metallic tang of tired sweat. It was 0500. Captain Eva Rostova stood at the edge of the weak projector light, her shadow swallowed by the plywood walls of the operations hut. She was on deck for the weather brief. Major Bull Shaw, the squadron director of operations, paced in front of the main screen. He was a man built like the aircraft he flew, solid, unsubtle, and brutally effective. He thrived on instinct, on stick and rudder energy. He did not thrive on data points. "All right, settle down," Shaw barked. The murmurs of the other A-10 pilots, call signs like Jester, Rhino, and Axe, died. "Intel says the valley is hot. We're on high-tempo ops." He clicked his remote. A map of Helmand Province appeared, red circles marking insurgent activity. "We're here to put warheads on foreheads, simple as." He gestured dismissively toward Eva. "But first, protocol. Captain Rostova, give us the weather. Keep it brief." Eva stepped forward. The projector light felt hot. She cleared her throat, clicking her own remote. The red map was replaced by a complex series of isobars and Doppler projections. "Good morning, sir. Standard MEDAR for KAF is clear. Winds calm. However, the 72-hour TAF shows a significant anomaly." A few pilots shifted in their seats. She saw Rhino nudge Jester. "We are tracking a low-pressure system moving rapidly from the Pakistani border," Eva continued, her voice even, clinical. "The models are showing a high probability of convective instability colliding with the orographic lift from the Hindu Kush range. This will trigger—" "English, Captain," Shaw cut in. He didn't look at her. He looked at the map, as if her data were an annoying insect crawling on it. Eva held his gaze. "A monsoon, Major. A severe one. I'm projecting wind shear exceeding 40 knots in the valleys, 0 visibility, and extreme icing above 10,000 feet by 1500 Zulu." A low chuckle came from the back. Shaw smiled, a tight, condescending twitch of the lips. "A monsoon, in the desert, in October. Duly noted." He turned back to the tactical map. "Sounds like you weather guessers are running out of ideas." "Sir, my analysis is firm. The barometric pressure has dropped." "Captain, I don't fly a barometer. I fly a warthog." Shaw took a step toward her, lowering his voice just enough so only the first 2 rows could hear. "Your analysis is fine for a textbook. Out here, we trust our eyes. You see that? He pointed out the window. The sky was a pale, perfect blue. That's the weather. It's clear. The sting of the dismissal was sharp, familiar. It was the heat rising in her neck. The immediate acidic urge to defend her doctorate, her cross-training, her competence. She crushed it. She always crushed it. She just nodded. Understood, sir. Good. Thanks for the color. Shaw turned his back to her, the public humiliation complete. Now, for the real threats. Jester, Rhino, you're on primary KS alert. Eva faded back into the shadows, her mind already running the calculations again. He was wrong. The pressure drop was real. The humidity increase at altitude was real. The sky was lying. She stood in silence for 10 minutes, listening to the assignments, the ordnance loads, the ROE reminders. She was just the weather girl. A box to be checked. When Shaw finished, he glanced at the duty roster. Right. That leaves the Northern Patrol. Sector Delta. Low threat, just keeping an eye on a suspected smuggling route. He looked around. Anyone want it? Silence. It was the milk run. 8 hours of flying ovals in the middle of nowhere. Eva spoke into the quiet. I'll take it, sir. Shaw looked surprised, then that smirk returned. All yours, Tempest. He used her call sign, but it felt like an insult. Try not to get your wings wet. She nodded, picked up her helmet bag, and walked out. She ignored the snickers that followed her. She knew Sector Delta. It was directly in the path of the mountain range. It was exactly where the storm would hit first. She let the heavy door slam shut, the sound a punctuation mark on her silent promise. She would be ready. The Afghan sun was already sharp at 0530, casting long, stark shadows across the flight line. Eva walked toward her aircraft, Hog 01, parked in a hardened revetment. The concrete walls felt like a cage, a place to hold the beast. Her Warthog was not one of the sleek, upgraded models. It was an older bird, its gray paint chipped and faded by sand and sun. Its skin bore the scars of a dozen patch jobs. Eva preferred it. The newer jets were heavy on digital glass cockpits. Hers was a fortress of analog dials, steam gauges, and raw hydraulics. It was a machine that demanded to be flown, not just managed. She slung her helmet bag onto the tarmac with a solid thump and began her walk around. The ritual grounded her. The briefing room was a place of ego and opinion. The flight line was a place of physics and consequences. Here, the only thing that mattered was diligence. She ran her gloved hand over the leading edge of the wing. Smooth. She checked the turbine fans of the massive TF-34 engines, the titanium bathtub surrounding the cockpit, the hinges on the 30mm GAU-8 Avenger cannon. Her fingers traced rivet lines, checking for pops or stress. This was her armor. Just a scientist, not a warrior. Shaw's voice, unbidden. It pricked at her focus. She paused, her hand on the nose gear. Was he right? Did she see the world as a problem to be solved, while they saw it as a fight to be won? She shook her head, forcing the doubt away. A warrior who didn't understand the battlefield was just a brawler, and the weather was the battlefield. She moved to the ordnance, 2 pods of rockets, 4 Mavericks, and a full drum for the gun, standard loadout for a patrol that expected nothing. She double-checked the pylon mounts. Morning, ma'am. Eva looked up. Sergeant Diaz, her crew chief, was already by the ladder, a data pad in his hand. He was a quiet man whose face seemed permanently etched with desert dust and hydraulic grease. Sergeant? She nodded. She clean? Spotless, Diaz said. He didn't meet her eyes, instead focusing on a fuel panel. Topped off, all systems green, she's ready to hunt. There was a pause. Diaz tapped his stylus against the pad, a nervous rhythm. "Heard the brief, ma'am," he said, his voice low, casual, almost too casual. Ava stiffened slightly. It was brief. Diaz looked up, finally meeting her gaze. His eyes were clear, steady. "The other crews, they just wanted the basics. I ran the full satellite downlink." He gestured to the open avionics bay. "Pulled the latest data stream. Your TAF looks solid." Eva felt a small, unfamiliar crack in her isolation. "He's wrong, ma'am," Diaz said, dropping the pretense. "They all think they can just punch through it. This ain't that kind of storm." He closed the panel with a firm snap. I packed the extra data link filters for the comms package, the humidity and static, just in case." Just in case. It was the smallest of rebellions, a quiet act of professional solidarity that meant more than any verbal defense in the briefing room. He believed her. He had done the extra work, the unrecognized preparation, based on her science. A tightness in Eva's chest eased. "Thank you, Sergeant. That's good thinking. We just keep 'em flying, ma'am. You just bring her back. Wilco." She grabbed the ladder and began the climb. The cockpit smelled of old metal, wire insulation, and the faint, familiar scent of her own recycled oxygen. It was the smell of focus. She settled into the heavy ejection seat, the straps and buckles a familiar embrace. She began her systems check, her hands moving with an economy born of 1,000 repetitions. Battery, APU, avionics on. The green glow of the analog dials lit her face. The machine was honest. It didn't care about rank or gender or whether she was a scientist or a warrior. It only cared about her competence. Eva sealed the heavy canopy. The hiss of the seal locking in place was a final, definitive sound. It shut out the flight line, the base, the briefing room, and Major Shaw. Inside the glass bubble, it was just her, Tempest, and the sky that was waiting to prove her right. She keyed the mic. "Kandahar Tower, Hog 01, ready for engine start." The Warthog climbed out of Kandahar's airspace, banking north into the vast, empty blue. Below the desert was a crumpled sheet of brown and tan, scarred by wadis and ancient riverbeds. Sector Delta. Eva settled the aircraft into a racetrack pattern, a long, repetitive oval at 12,000 feet. This was the milk run. Her job was to be a presence, a deterrent in the sky, orbiting for hours, seeing nothing, doing nothing. The sun beat through the canopy, and the cockpit grew warm. The low, steady drone of the twin engines vibrated through the seat, a hypnotic hum. This was the part of flying that manuals didn't describe. The crushing, mind-numbing boredom. She hated it. She hated being right and being useless. She watched her instruments. The outside air temperature was dropping faster than standard lapse rate. The barometric pressure, cross-referenced with her Kandahar readings, confirmed the rapid approach of the low-pressure front. After an hour, she saw it. To the east, where the mountains clawed at the sky, a wall of cloud was building. It wasn't the fluffy, benign cumulus of a normal afternoon. This was a monster, a churning mass of bruised yellow-gray that boiled up to 40,000 feet. The anvil-shaped top of a cumulonimbus, unmistakable and violent. Shaw could trust his eyes, but his eyes were back at Kaf, looking at a clear patch of sky. Her eyes were on the truth. Her first pass near the mountains gave her a taste of it. The A-10 jolted, a sharp, angry slap of turbulence that threw her against her straps, wind shear, just as she'd predicted. Boredom mixed with anxiety. The feeling was a familiar one. She could just fly her ovals. She could just wait for her bingo fuel call, return to base, and say, "I told you so." It would be the safe, professional, and petty thing to do. But that wasn't who she was. Her hand moved from the throttle to the avionics panel. This was unauthorized. Using combat sensors for atmospheric sounding was not in any A-10 flight manual. It was a waste of resources, Shaw would have argued. She engaged the ground mapping radar, but angled the sensor array higher, toward the cloud wall. She switched the display to Doppler mode, not looking for tanks, but for precipitation density. She tasked the targeting pod, not to find insurgents, but to get laser-accurate readings of the cloud base and temperature layers. She was turning a $30 million attack jet into a mobile weather station. The data streamed onto her secondary display. It was worse than she thought. The system wasn't just moving fast. It was self-intensifying, feeding off the hot desert air. It was accelerating. Her model had it hitting KAF at 1500. This data showed it would hit the valleys, her sector, by 1300, and it would be a wall of water and ice. A small, cold knot formed in her stomach. This wasn't about being right anymore. This was about being trapped. She logged the data, her fingers flying across the console. She prepared a formal weather update, a PIREP, pilot report, backed by hard sensor data, and transmitted it to the command frequency. Jagger Hog 01, filing updated PIREP for Sector Delta. Recommend all air assets. The response was a burst of noise. The storm was already playing hell with high-frequency comms. Hog 01, Jagger, a bored voice finally crackled back. Be advised, Jagger is Redcon 1, high-tempo ops. Your PIREP is logged. Maintain your station. Logged, the bureaucratic equivalent of a trash can. Eva gripped the stick. The air was getting rougher. The beautiful, terrible wall of gray was closer now. A silent, advancing army. Command was silent. Shaw was silent. She was just the girl on the milk run, flying ovals in the shadow of the apocalypse. The green glow of her avionics was steady, a defiant contrast to the sick, churning yellow of the sky outside. She was alone with the data, and the data was screaming. She was on the southern leg of the oval, her fuel state just beginning to color her planning, when the radio exploded. It wasn't a call. It was a scream, ripped apart by static and the physics of the storm she was now orbiting. Agger! Any asset! Trident is... Ops in contact! We are danger close! Danger close! Eva's blood went cold. Not a gradual chill, but a sudden, violent freeze that contracted her heart. The boredom evaporated, sucked from the cockpit, replaced by a vacuum. Troops in contact. The two most terrifying words in the lexicon. Her hands moved before her brain caught up, an act of pure, conditioned reflex. She banked the A-10 hard, pulling her nose off the racetrack pattern, instinctively turning toward the storm wall, where the call must have come from. Jagger, Hog 01, she transmitted, her voice tight, almost unrecognizable to her own ears. Solid copy on the TIC, requesting location. The command frequency, Jagger, was suddenly sharp, the board operator gone. Hog 01, standby. All other assets are grounded or RTB due to weather. You are the sole asset. The sole asset. The milk run. The words hit her with the force of a physical blow. Shaw had grounded everyone else. He had believed the sky, not the data. And now, she was all that was left. Jagger, Hog 01 is on station, armed and ready for tasking. The cold, sharp focus descended. The fear was still there, a knot of ice in her stomach, but the warrior mind was now at the controls. Hog 01, you are diverted, the controller said, his voice rapid, formal. Authenticate, valid. Tasking, immediate KS. Call sign Trident. Frequency. She switched frequencies, her thumb flicking the dial. The storm wall loomed, no longer a scientific curiosity, but a barrier. Trident, this is Hog 0-1, how copy? The static was deafening, a roar of wind and rain. Then, a voice burst through, strained and breathless, punctuated by the unmistakable rapid thump, thump, thump of a DSHK heavy machine gun in the background. Hog 0-1, thank God. We are pinned. Box Canyon. Taking effective fire from bunker 209er degrees from our pass. Trident, Hog 0-1, send your 9 line. The JTAC read the coordinates. Eva's fingers flew, punching the numbers into her navigation computer. The target coordinates and the friendly position lit up on her HUD. They were deep inside Sector Delta, deep inside the storm. Hog 0-1, copies all, she said. The world narrowed to those glowing green numbers, the fuel gauge, the altimeter, the wall of black cloud ahead. I am inbound, estimating 5 minutes. You don't have 5 minutes, Hog, the JTAC yelled, breaking protocol. We're getting chewed up. You have to… The transmission died, cut off by a proximity fuse explosion. Trident? Trident, this is Hog 0-1, say again. Only static. Eva slammed the throttle levers forward to the firewall. The engines spooled with a hungry, rising shriek. The A-10 leaped forward, accelerating directly at the boiling black wall of the Monsoon. She wasn't the weather girl anymore. She wasn't the scientist. She was the only asset, and she was flying straight into the storm she had predicted, to save a team that had never known her name. The A-10 hit the cloud wall at 350 knots. It was not a transition. It was an impact. The world vanished, replaced by an impenetrable, violent gray. The jet, a 30,000-pound airframe of titanium and aluminum, was instantly reduced to a leaf in a hurricane. The turbulence struck with a physical, malicious force, slamming Eva against her restraints. Her helmet cracked against the side of the canopy. Alarms shrieked, the stall warning, the altitude alert. She fought the stick, her entire body rigid, muscles burning against the hydraulics. The jet wanted to roll over and die. She was flying completely blind. The mountains were, out there, invisible granite claws waiting to rip her from the sky. This is insane. This is unsurvivable. The primal, reptilian part of her brain screamed to turn back, to climb above the ice, to flee. Then the radio crackled, a desperate gasp over the roar of the wind. Hog! Taking casualties! Need eyes! The plea cut through the panic. It was the voice of the Trident JTAC. Duty. She forced her eyes back to the instruments. This was not a visual flight. This was pure science. She focused on her radar altimeter, her artificial horizon, her heading. She was flying the data, not the sky. The rain hammered the canopy with the sound of frantic drumming, a deafening, percussive roar. Then came a new sound, a harsh slap, 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 slap against the fuselage. Hail. A new warning tone, a high-pitched ee. The icing light flashed amber on her console. Damn it, she hissed. Ice was forming on the wings, destroying lift, adding weight. She was too low, too slow. The storm was trying to drag her out of the air. She pushed power to the engine anti-ice systems, diverting precious energy. The jet shuddered in protest. A voice cut through on the command frequency, sharp and authoritative. It was Jagger. Hog 01, Jagger. You are below weather minima, ROE violation. You are ordered to stand down. Repeat, stand down and RTB immediately. This was it. The lawful order. The exit. The safe way out. Shaw was probably standing right behind the controller, waiting for her to fail. All she had to do was obey. She pictured the map, the box canyon, the DSHK, the voices on the radio. She keyed her mic, her thumb finding the button despite the violent shaking. "Jagger, Hog 01, she transmitted. Her voice was a low, steady growl that defied the chaos. Unable to comply. A shocked silence from command. Unable to comply. Eva repeated, the words tasting like iron. Am the only asset. Proceeding with tasking. Hog 01 out. She switched her radio back to the Trident tactical frequency, severing the link to Jagger. She had just drawn a line. She had disobeyed a direct order. She was no longer just flying a mission. She was committing an act of profound insubordination. There was no going back. Her career was over, one way or another. The weight of the decision settled on her, heavier than the G-forces, but with it came a strange, cold clarity. The doubt was gone. Shaw was gone. The briefing room was gone. It was just her, the storm, and the men on the ground. She didn't fight the storm, she used it. Her meteorologist's mind saw the wind not as turbulence, but as vectors. She angled the jet into the wind shear, letting the updrafts hold her altitude rather than fighting them with the stick. She wasn't just a pilot, she was tempest, and this was her element. The airframe groaned, a sound of metal under unbearable stress. She was deep in the cauldron. Then, for one heart-stopping second, the gray void below her tore open. She broke through a cloud layer. She was in the canyon, 500 feet above the floor, and the radio exploded with the sound of sustained gunfire. The canyon floor was a blur of gray rock and churning, muddy water just 500 feet below. The rain was a solid curtain, a deluge so dense it felt like flying through a waterfall. Hog 01, Trident! We see you! We're popping smoke! Yellow smoke! Eva scanned the ground, her eyes straining. Trident, I have no visual on smoke. The rain is too heavy. Talk me on. The world was reduced to a gray-on-gray smear. Her targeting pod, the multi-million-dollar eye of the A-10, was useless. The infrared was blinded by the wall of cold water, and the electro-optical lens saw nothing but a uniform, washed-out blur. Her eyes, the tools Shaw valued, were gone. The bunker. 209er from us. High on the cliff. Engaging us now. The air around the A-10 lit up. Bright green-white tracers stitched the rain, arcing past her canopy with a terrifying hiss. It was the DSHK. It was shooting at her. Instinct took over. Eva jammed the stick hard, pulling the jet into a violent, jinking turn. The G-forces crushed her into the seat. The tracers followed her, the enemy gunner walking the stream of 50 caliber rounds through the sky. This was a nightmare. She was in a knife fight in a closet, blindfolded. Trident, I see the muzzle flash, but I cannot get a lock, she transmitted, her voice strained from the G-load. I don't have positive ID. I can't drop ordnance. The rules of engagement were absolute. You must have PID. You do not shoot at a muzzle flash in a danger-close situation. The risk of fratricide, of killing the men she was here to save, was too high. The bunker was too close to their position. We don't have time, Tempest. The JTAC's voice was breaking. He's walking the gun onto us. You have to do something. She had rockets. She had Mavericks. She had a cannon, and all of it was worthless without a target. The pressure was immense, a physical weight on her chest. Act now, but don't hit friendlies. The two directives were at war, paralyzing her. Think, Eva, think. The pilot's tools had failed. Her eyes had failed. Her pod had failed. She leveled out at the far end of the canyon. the DSHK tracers falling away as she passed out of their firing arc. She had seconds to make a plan. Trident. I am inbound for a show of force. Going to try and draw his fire again, see if I can get a mark. Copy, Hog. We're keeping our heads down. It was a desperate move. She banked the jet, lining up for another pass, this time even lower. She dropped a pair of flares, not to decoy a missile, but just to make noise, to make light in the oppressive gray. The flares lit the canyon in a brief, flickering magnesium-white glare. She saw it, the wet black rock of the cliff, face, the plume of yellow smoke from the seals being torn apart by the wind, and high above it, nothing. Just a dark stain on the rock. The DSHK opened up again, tracers reaching for her. She jinked, fighting the controls, while her thumb tried to slew the targeting pod sensor onto the flash. No lock. No lock. The computer refused to see it. The rain was too thick, the contrast too low. Thwack. 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 Small arms fire. They were shooting at her with rifles now. The sound was like pebbles hitting the titanium tub around her. She pulled up, defeated, climbing back into the relative safety of the low clouds. The failure was a physical, bitter taste in her mouth. She had shown force, and it had proven nothing except that she was vulnerable, and the enemy was not. She had failed the pass. The JTAC's voice came over the radio, no longer a yell, but a strained, quiet statement. A man accepting his fate. Tempest. We have 2 KIAs. He's walking the gun onto us. We have seconds. Seconds, Tempest. The traditional way had failed. The pilot was useless. Her instincts were useless. She was sitting in the most powerful gunship in the world, and she was nothing but a target. Seconds, Tempest. The words echoed in the cockpit, a death sentence spoken over the howl of the wind. Ava pulled the A-10 into a tight, climbing turn at the end of the canyon, the jet groaning under the strain. Her fuel light flickered, a new, insistent amber eye demanding her attention. She had 1, maybe 2 more passes. Her mind was racing, discarding failed options. Visual pass, failed. TGP, failed. IR, failed. Show of force, failed. The stick and rudder solutions, the warrior solutions, all useless. The storm had beaten the pilot. I don't fly a barometer. I fly a warthog, Shaw's voice. The condescension. The casual dismissal of her true expertise. Eva's head snapped up. Her breath caught in her mask. He was wrong. She wasn't just a pilot flying a warthog. She was a meteorologist, trapped in the most advanced weather-gathering machine on the planet. Trident, stand by, she transmitted, her voice suddenly different. The strained panic was gone, replaced by a cold, academic calm. I am running a calculation. It was a gamble. A desperate, insane leap of faith based on a half-remembered lecture from her doctorate. Her hand moved to the avionics panel. Her thumb found the switch for the targeting pod and clicked it. The display went dark. She turned it off. She stopped trying to see the target. Instead, her fingers flew across the radar control panel. She switched the ground mapping radar from terrain following to Doppler weather mode. It was the same setting she had used on the milk run. The radar display, normally black or showing ground clutter, flickered. It repainted itself as a swirling mass of green, yellow, and red, the precipitation density map. It was a weather forecaster's view, showing the guts of the storm. What? What are you doing, Hog? The JTAC's voice was thin, confused. The gunfire was continuous now. The bunker is on a cliff face, Eva said, talking as much to herself as to him. The scientist's mind was in control, her voice precise, clinical. It's built into the rock. It has It has an overhang, a solid mass. She was staring at the radar map, the jet bucking around her. The rain in the canyon was a solid red wall on her screen. Uniform, heavy, and constant. Except, it wasn't constant. "The rain is falling vertically," she muttered, her eyes locked on the screen. "A wall of water. But if there is a solid object, a large, solid object protruding from the cliff, it will create an obstruction." She saw it. It was tiny. A single pixel-wide anomaly in the data stream. A hole in the solid red wall of rain. A place where the precipitation was not falling because something was blocking it. It was a rain shadow. The bunker's overhang was catching the rain, creating a dry spot directly in front of and below it. The radar, sensitive enough to map microscopic water droplets, was painting that dry spot as a void. "I have it," she breathed. The words were a prayer. She didn't have a visual. She didn't have an infrared signature. She had a calculation. She had a map of where the rain wasn't. "Gotcha," she thought. Major Shaw's mocking voice vanished. All the doubt, the imposter syndrome, the years of being the bookworm in a room full of warriors, it all evaporated. She wasn't the weather girl. She was the storm, and she had just found her target. "Trident, Hog 01, she said, her voice resonating with a new, unshakable authority. "I have a positive identification. It is unconventional. You need to trust me." She was no longer a pilot at 500 feet. She was a scientist, and the battlefield was her laboratory. Eva banked the A-10 again, a tight, fuel-burning circle at the canyon's edge. The aircraft shuddered, hungry for air, fighting the storm. She had the target, but it was a target that existed only as a void on a radar screen. She keyed the mic, her voice the only calm thing in the sky. "Trident, Hog 01, I have your target. It's the bunker. I am targeting a radar-defined rain shadow cast by the bunker's overhang. Do you copy?" The radio crackled. For a full 3 seconds, there was only static and the distant muffled thump of the DSHK. The JTAC was processing. "Hog, say again?" His voice was incredulous. "You're targeting a what? A rain shadow?" The sound of gunfire intensified. He was yelling over it now. "Tempest, that's not a target. That's weather. I need bombs on a bunker." Doubt, cold and sharp, pricked at Eva. Was this just a theory? A desperate academic guess? She was betting their lives on a meteorological anomaly. She pictured Shaw in the debrief, his face contemptuous as she tried to explain targeting a lack of rain. "He's walking the gun onto us." The JTAC's scream shattered her doubt. Theory didn't matter. Survival did. "Trident, listen to me," she said, her voice dropping, forcing him to focus. "The rain is a solid wall. Your bunker is a solid object. It is blocking the rain. I can see the hole where the rain isn't. That hole is your target. It's the only PID we have." Tempest. ROE requires visual confirmation. I must see it, or you must see it. I cannot authorize a strike on a theory. He was right. By the book, he was absolutely right. A radar anomaly was not visual. If she shot and missed, if she hit his men, they would both be crucified. He was a man drowning, and she had just offered him a complex physics equation instead of a rope. She took a breath, the recycled air tasting flat. She had to make him see with her mind. "Trident, I have visual," she said, the words sharp, final. "It's just not optical. The radar is painting a picture. I am looking at a precise, meter-accurate map of the cliff face." She lined the jet up for the attack run. This was it. No more debate. "I am inbound," she stated. Not a request. A fact. The Pipper will be on that shadow. Your men are at the base of the cliff. The bunker is above you, offset 209er. The math is sound. She was asking him to bet his life and his team's lives on her academic knowledge. She was asking him to violate the core rule of his job based on her word alone. The radio was silent, just the howl of the wind and the pounding of the DSHK. He was deciding. She watched her fuel gauge. The amber light was no longer flickering. It was solid. Come on. Trust me. The silence stretched, heavier than the G-forces. She was 10 seconds from the release point. God help us. The JTAC's voice was a ragged whisper, the fight gone out of it, replaced by a final, desperate gamble. You are cleared hot, Tempest. Send it. The words cut through the chaos. There was no turning back. Ava's hands were already moving, rolling the A-10 into its attack dive. The Pipper, her targeting reticle, appeared on the HUD. It was centered on a blank gray screen, aimed at nothing. Aimed at an absence. She lined up the aircraft, her eyes darting between the radar screen and the HSI. The rain shadow was a stable, unmoving void in the storm. It was her anchor. Inbound, 209er, she stated, her voice a low monotone. The altimeter unwound. 800 feet. 700. The canyon floor was a death trap just below the rain. Then the world tilted. It wasn't turbulence. It was a solid, invisible fist that punched the jet from below. A microburst. A localized, violent downdraft she hadn't predicted. The A-10 slammed sideways. The Pipper skidded off the invisible target. A proximity alert shrieked in her helmet. The canyon wall. A flash of white-hot adrenaline. She hadn't seen this. Her model was incomplete. Her arm burned, muscles screaming as she fought the stick, trying to wrestle 30,000 pounds of metal back onto a target she couldn't see. The jet was wallowing, fighting her, trying to drop. The stick and rudder pilot took over. Her feet danced on the pedals, stomping the rudder to correct the yaw, her hand making a dozen micro-corrections on the stick. Don't hit the wall. Don't hit the wall. But her eyes never left the radar display. The scientist refused to let go. The physical struggle merged with the intellectual focus. Her body was fighting the storm. Her mind was locked on the data. The HSI needle wavered, then steadied. The green sweep of the radar showed the rain shadow rushing toward her. Trust the math. Trust the math. The proximity alarm was a solid, deafening tone. She was too close. The G-forces pressed her down, trying to crush her as she corrected the dive, her arm aching with the impossible strain. The Pipper slid back over the void on the radar. It was aligned. She was aiming at a ghost. Her thumb moved to the trigger, the plastic cold and final. She ignored the proximity alarm. She ignored the fuel warning. She ignored the screaming wind that threatened to tear the wings off. She focused on that single, beautiful, perfect hole in the data. Hog 01, she breathed, her voice a strained whisper against the G-load. Visual. She was perfectly aligned. The Pipper was steady. She was ready. The Pipper was steady on the radar void. Her thumb rested on the trigger. The world had compressed to this single point of data, this one final act. Then, a new voice ripped into her helmet. This one on the command frequency. It was sharp, furious, and deafeningly clear. Hog 01, this is Major Shaw. What in the hell do you think you're doing? The voice was a physical intrusion, a violation of the sterile, focused world she had built inside the cockpit. He had patched himself in from the command tent at KIF. Major, I am danger close, engaging. You are ordered to RTB, Shaw roared. The signal was clean. He was using a satellite link, punching straight through the storm that blinded him. "You are violating ROE. You have no visual. You are ordered to disengage." "I will have you court-martialed, Captain. Abort! Abort now!" This was the final test. The lawful order. The voice of her career, her future, her entire chain of command. He was offering her an out, an excuse. She could obey. She could pull up, let the men die, and return to base, her record clean, her failure justified by the rules. She would be safe. She would be a good pilot who followed orders. She thought of the JTAC's voice. God help us. She thought of the 2 KIAs. She looked at the radar screen, the rain shadow, the math, the truth. Her thumb moved from the trigger to the radio frequency dial. With a single, deliberate click, she switched from the command channel to the Trident tactical channel. Major Shaw vanished. He was gone, cut out of her world, reduced to the static he deserved. She was alone again. Just her, the storm, and the target. Her entire life, her career, her doctorate, her hours of flight time. It had all led to this single, irrevocable second. The weather girl and the warrior. They were the same person. My sky. My call. Her thumb settled back onto the trigger. The plastic was cold, hard, and final. Hog 01 visual, she transmitted to Trident, her voice a calm, steady instrument. In hot, she pressed the trigger. The world dissolved. It was not a sound. It was a state of being. The GAU-8A Avenger cannon erupted, a force of nature unleashed from her control. The entire 30,000-pound airframe shuddered. Brrrt! A vibration so deep it felt like it was tearing the jet, and her, apart from the inside out. The smell of ozone and burnt propellant instantly filled the cockpit, sharp and acrid, the smell of cordite. A torrent of 30 millimeters high-explosive incendiary rounds, 65 per second, screamed into the gray void. She couldn't see the target, but she saw her tracers. They lit the rain, a solid white line of fire lancing through the storm, converging perfectly on the invisible point defined by the radar. She held the trigger down. 1 second. 2. The gray void where the bunker was supposed to be flashed orange, a brief, violent flower of light blooming inside the rain, instantly extinguished. A secondary explosion. She was still screaming toward the granite wall. "Pull! Pull!" She hauled back on the stick with all her strength, her arm burning, G-forces driving her into the seat. The A-10 screamed in protest, the airframe buffeted by the downdraft and her own violent maneuver. The proximity alarm was a solid, unending wail. She didn't know if she would clear the ridge. She closed her eyes. The jet shuddered, then caught. The alarm stopped. She was climbing, alive, out of the dive. She banked hard, her breath ragged in her mask. The canyon fell away behind her. The gun was silent. The A-10 punched through a thin layer of cloud, momentarily safe at the top of its climb. Ava's entire body was shaking, a violent, uncontrollable tremor as the adrenaline dump hit her. Her breath came in ragged, shallow gasps inside the oxygen mask. The smell of gun gas was thick, acrid. She had done it. The act was complete. But the radio was dead. There was no screaming, no gunfire, no target destroyed. Nothing. Just the overwhelming hiss of the storm, a white noise that filled the void. A new kind of terror, colder and heavier than the fear of the storm, settled into the cockpit. The silence. It was impossibly, horribly empty. Did I miss? The tracers had looked good. The secondary explosion, that was real, wasn't it? Oh God, did I hit them? The thought was a spike of ice in her gut. Danger close. Her margin of error was 0. A microsecond of panic on the stick. a miscalculation in the rain shadow. She was suddenly, horrifyingly, a potential war criminal, a fratricide. The savior who had arrived just in time to deliver the killing blow to the men she was sent to protect. "Trident! Hog 01, report!" she transmitted, her voice cracking. Only static answered. The silence was an accusation. She looked at her console. The fuel light was a solid, mocking amber. The gun indicator read "Sous-Auxilium." She was Winchester, out of ammo, and she was bingo. She had just enough fuel to make it back to Kandahar if she climbed out now and flew a perfect profile. She had to leave. She couldn't leave. "Trident! Trident! Talk to me!" she yelled, slamming her gloved fist against the canopy rail. "Status, now!" The silence was her answer. It was the longest 10 seconds of her life. The wait stretched into an eternity, filled with the images of Shaw's court-martial, of the faces of the men she might have killed. The victory, if it had come, was as invisible and as quiet as the target had been. She made the choice. To hell with the fuel, to hell with Shaw, she would not run. "Hog 01 is inbound for BDA Pass," she said, her voice numb. She pushed the stick forward, nosing the heavy jet over, back down into the cauldron, back into the rain, the wind, the granite walls. She had to know. She had to see. The jet descended, the rain hammering the glass again. She leveled off at 700 feet, flying straight toward the cliff face where she had fired. Her heart was a cold, hard knot. Then, a click on the radio. A burst of static, followed by a new voice. It wasn't the JTAC, it was someone else. The voice was low, calm, and steady, almost casual. "Hog 01. Eva stopped breathing. "Good." Rain, tempest. A pause. She heard the man take a breath. "Target destroyed. The DSHK is gone." The cockpit, which had been freezing, suddenly felt intensely hot. Ava's vision swam. "Trident is secure. We're moving the wounded. You saved us." Eva closed her eyes, her forehead resting against the cold glass of the HUD. The tremor in her hands was so bad she could barely hold the stick. She pulled the jet up, climbing away from the canyon, her strength utterly spent. She tried to key the mic, but no sound came out. She cleared her throat, the lump in it painful. "Hog 01. She finally managed to whisper. "Solid copy, Trident. Good hunting." She was climbing. She was out. She was alive. And so were they. The climb out was a brutal mechanical exercise. The relief of the target destroyed call lasted only a few seconds, immediately replaced by the cold, hard realities of physics. The amber bingo light was no longer a suggestion. It was a death sentence ticking down. The storm she had plunged into was now a prison she had to escape. Ava's hands, still shaking, moved with practiced efficiency. She nursed the throttles, finding the most efficient climb rate, her eyes glued to the fuel flow gauge. Every pound of thrust cost her precious seconds. The adrenaline was fading fast, draining from her system like a breached dam. In its place, a profound, bone-deep exhaustion settled in. Her muscles ached from the G-forces and the fight against the stick. Her head throbbed where her helmet had struck the canopy, and with the exhaustion came the cold, clear realization of what she had done. I ignored a direct order. I violated ROE. I cut my CO out of the comms loop. I will be court-martialed. She had saved them. But in the eyes of the Air Force, she was a rogue asset, a loose cannon who had risked billions in equipment and international incident on a rain shadow. The word sounded insane even in her own head, now that the immediate threat was gone. The flight back to Kandahar was a silent 40-minute purgatory. She was no longer fighting an enemy. She was fighting the storm itself and her own dwindling fuel. The wind hammered her, forcing her to constantly correct her heading, burning fuel she didn't have. The ice was still there, a greedy presence on her wings. She was no longer Tempest, the avenging angel. She was Captain Rostova, a pilot in deep trouble trying not to crash. When the lights of Kandahar airfield finally punched through the gray deluge, her fuel gauge read, "Emergency." She had minutes. Kandahar Tower, Hog 01 declaring emergency. Minimum fuel, requesting straight-in ILS approach. Hog 01 Tower, cleared straight in, runway 05. Winds are extreme. Crosswind at 30 knots, gusting to 40. Be advised, braking action is nil. Of course it is. The storm she predicted had arrived here too. She lined up the jet, her eyes locked on the glowing green needles of the instrument landing system. The rain was so heavy, she couldn't see the runway lights until she was less than 100 feet above them. The jet crabbed sideways against the wind, a terrifying angle of attack. Trust the math. Trust the data. The wheels touched. The jet skidded, the tires screaming on the flooded tarmac as the crosswind tried to weather vane her off the runway. She fought the rudders, her leg aching with the pressure, tapping the brakes, feeling the anti-skid system pulse violently. The jet slowed. It held. She was down. She taxied off the active runway, her body limp, her hands feeling disconnected from her arms. She rolled toward her designated revetment, the engines whining down. The ground crews were there, bundled in green ponchos, their faces barely visible under their hoods. They signaled her in. But she wasn't looking at them. She was looking at the figure standing just outside the concrete blast wall, unmoving in the downpour. He wore no rain gear. His flight suit was already soaked dark. His arms were crossed. Major Bull Shaw. He was waiting for her. The relief of landing vanished, replaced by a cold, hard dread. The battle was over. The consequences were just beginning. Ava shut down the engines. The sudden, profound silence was broken only by the sound of the rain hammering against the canopy, a frantic, accusing drumbeat. She unbuckled her straps, her movements heavy, robotic. She was no longer a hero. She was a defendant. She pushed the canopy release. With a pneumatic hiss, the glass bubble opened, letting in the cold, wet air and the smell of the storm. She climbed down the ladder, her legs unsteady. She stood on the wet tarmac, the rain plastering her hair to her face. She looked at Shaw. He didn't salute. My office, now. Major Shaw's office was a plywood box, smelling of wet gear, stale coffee, and his own cold fury. The rain hammered the thin roof, a deafening drumbeat that matched the pounding in Ava's head. She stood at attention in front of his desk, a puddle forming at her feet. She was soaked, exhausted, and trembling from the adrenaline crash, but she locked her knees, forcing stillness. Shaw sat behind his desk, perfectly dry. He held a digital data pad. He didn't look at her. He looked at the pad as if it were an indictment. Captain Rostova, he began, his voice dangerously quiet, all the earlier roaring compressed into a flat, lethal monotone. I have the logs, from Jagger and from your own aircraft's black box. He looked up, his eyes hard. You ignored weather minima. You ignored a direct order to RTB. You ignored ROE, engaging a target you could not see. Danger close, to friendly forces. You intentionally severed command communications. He listed the violations like a coroner reading an autopsy report. Each one was a nail in her career's coffin. You risked a $30 million asset, the lives of a SEAL team, and a potential international incident, on a hunch. He tossed the datapad onto the desk. It clattered, loud in the small room. Explain yourself, Captain. Give me one reason, one single professional reason. I shouldn't have you on a plane back to the States in cuffs before this storm even clears. The exhaustion was a heavy cloak, pulling her down. It would be so easy to cry, to apologize, to plead the desperation of the call, the men dying. It would be easy to throw herself on his mercy. But the cold, clinical part of her, the scientist, the meteorologist, the woman who had trusted the math over the sky, refused. Her integrity was the only armor she had left. She would not beg. Her voice, when she spoke, was as flat and steady as his. I did not have a hunch, sir. I had data. She reached into the thigh pocket of her flight suit. She pulled out the papers she had printed during the milk run, now damp and wrinkled. She pulled out the grease pencil notes she had scotch-taped to her kneeboard. She stepped forward, unbidden, and laid them on his desk with a wet slap. This is the 0400 isobar chart, cross-referenced with my sensor readings from Sector Delta at 12:30, she said, her finger tapping the first page. The pressure drop was accelerating, as briefed. She laid another page next to it. This is the Doppler radar data I collected. It showed the system intensification, as briefed. Shaw stared at the damp papers, his expression unreadable, contempt warring with confusion. That's just weather, Captain. It doesn't justify... It justifies the method, sir. Eva cut in, her voice hardening. She turned from the desk and picked up a dry erase marker from the tactical whiteboard behind her. She erased his tactical markings. She drew the box canyon. She drew the cliff face. She drew the coordinates of the Trident team. Then she began drawing wind vectors, precipitation density, fall rates. The rain in the canyon was uniform, a solid curtain, falling at a specific velocity. She said, her back to him, the marker moving with precision. The DSHK was in a bunker, with a known architectural overhang, standard Soviet design. She drew the bunker, and then she drew the void beneath it, the shadow. I didn't target the bunker, sir. I couldn't see it. I targeted the absence of rain, the radar shadow. I had a positive, data-driven identification of a solid mass at the exact coordinates the JTAC provided. She turned around. She held the marker. The ROE requires visual identification. My radar was my visual. It was not optical, but it was definitive. The math was sound. I did not fire blind. I fired at a calculation that proved correct. She stood there, scientist and pilot, her case made. She had not offered an excuse. She had offered a proof. She had not asked for forgiveness. She had presented her facts. Shaw stared at the whiteboard. He looked at her drawing of the rain shadow. He looked back at the damp data on his desk. He was a man of instinct, a brawler, and she had just handed him a doctoral thesis. He wanted to tear it apart. She could see the struggle in his jaw, but he couldn't. The data was real. The result was real. The logic, however insane it sounded, was irrefutable. He was silent for a full minute. The only sound was the rain, a relentless, pounding witness. He didn't say she was right. He didn't say she was wrong. He didn't say she was cleared, and he didn't say she was court-martialed. He finally looked at her, his eyes cold, the fury banked, replaced by something she couldn't read at all. "Get out," he said. "Sir?" "Get out of my office, Captain. Go debrief with Intel. You're done here." She stared, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It didn't. She snapped to attention. "Yes, sir." She turned, walked out of the office, and closed the door quietly behind her, leaving him alone with her impossible, undeniable math. She was dismissed, but not sentenced. She was a hero or a pariah, and she had no idea which. The next 48 hours were a new kind of storm, a quiet, bureaucratic one. Ava was grounded. The official order came down not from Shaw, but from Wing Command. Pending operational review. It was a sterile legal term that felt more suffocating than the Monsoon. She was a ghost in the squadron. In the operations room, conversations stopped when she entered. Pilots, Jester, Rhino, Axe, would suddenly find their boots fascinating, or become deeply engrossed in a technical manual. They didn't know what to do with her. She wasn't a hero. She hadn't received a medal. She wasn't a criminal. She hadn't been charged. She was an anomaly, a problem. The silence in the briefing room was louder than Shaw's yelling had ever been. This ambiguity was worse than punishment. The court-martial, at least, would have been a judgment. This was limbo. It left her alone with the one question that mattered. Did I do the right thing? She had saved them. She knew that. But the cost, the violation of the rules that held their world together, she was no longer sure. The cold logic of the rain shadow felt distant, like a dream. Now, in the harsh light of the flight line, only the broken rules felt real. She found herself in the maintenance bay, the only place she didn't feel the weight of staring eyes. She was standing in front of Hog 01, her jet. The ground crews had already patched the small arms impacts on the fuselage. The cannon had been reserviced. The jet was ready. She wasn't. "She's a good bird, ma'am." Eva turned. Sergeant Diaz was standing there, wiping grease from his hands with a blue rag. "She is," Eva said, her voice quiet. She ran a hand over the cold, gray skin of the jet. She held together. "You both did," Diaz said. He didn't meet her eye, just focused on a hydraulics panel. The telemetry from the black box. That was some flying, Captain. The way you use the radar. Even the techs at Lockheed are scratching their heads. It was just data, Sergeant. Yeah, well. Diaz tucked the rag into his back pocket. He was holding a laminated maintenance log. Sometimes data's all you got. He held out the logbook. We finished the post-flight inspection. She signed off, ready to fly. Thought you'd want to see the report. Eva took it, confused. Thank you, Sergeant. But I'm not on the schedule. I know, he said. He looked at her then. That same steady gaze from before the flight. Check the last page, ma'am. For your signature. Eva opened the binder. She flipped past the pages of engine diagnostics, hydraulic checks, and avionics reports. She got to the final sign-off sheet. It was blank. Except for one thing. Tucked into the spine of the binder. It was a small golden pin. A trident. The insignia of the U.S. Navy SEALs. Ava stared at it. Her breath caught. It was impossible. The Trident team was gone, extracted from the canyon, already on to their next classified mission. They were ghosts. They didn't interact with Air Force pilots. They didn't give out pins. She looked at Diaz. His expression was carefully neutral. Must have fallen in there, Diaz said quietly. During the clean-out, found it under the seat rails. Figured it was yours. He knew it wasn't. She knew it wasn't. It was a message, delivered through the only unofficial channel that existed. A message that had passed from a grateful operator to a ground crew, to her crew chief, and now to her. Eva picked up the pin. The metal was heavy, the 3 prongs sharp against her palm. Good rain, Tempest. The weight of it was immense. It weighed more than a medal. It weighed more than a court-martial. It was the only judgment that mattered. She closed her hand around it, the sharp points digging into her skin. The ambiguity was gone. The doubt was gone. She didn't know what Shaw would do. She didn't know if she would ever fly the A-10 again. Her career might be over. She looked at the golden trident in her palm, and for the first time in 2 days, she knew with absolute certainty that she had done the right thing. She didn't care about the rest. "Thank you, Sergeant Diaz," she said, her voice thick. I'll hold on to this." "Yes, ma'am." He nodded, then turned and walked away, leaving her alone with her jet and with the one piece of recognition she would ever receive. A week after the storm, the email arrived. "Auto 500, all pilots, squadron briefing, mandatory." That was it. "No Captain Rostova, report to Wing Command. No, you are cleared for flight." Just the same routine as always. The limbo continued. Eva walked into the briefing room at 0450. The air was thick with the usual smells of coffee and stale dust, but the mood was different. The casual pre-brief banter was muted. She didn't take her usual seat. She took a chair in the back row near the door, an easy exit. She felt the trident pin in her pocket, its sharp points a small, secret comfort. It was the only thing that felt real. She didn't know if she was here as a pilot or as a passenger waiting for a flight home in disgrace. Her identity hung by a thread. The other pilots filed in. Jester. Rhino. They saw her, and for the first time, they didn't look away. They gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod. Not of friendship, but of something. Acknowledgement. Major Shaw entered last. He looked tired. He carried his datapad and slapped it onto the podium. "Settle down," he barked. The room went silent. He ran through the ops summary. Intel updates, new threats, standard procedure. Ava watched, her heart a slow, heavy drum. He was avoiding it. He was avoiding her. Then, he got to the final slide. He clicked the remote. The tactical map vanished, replaced by a complex, swirling satellite image of the theater. A new storm system. Shaw stared at the screen for a long moment. He didn't speak. He just looked at the data, the ISO bars, the wind vectors. He had looked at screens like this 100 times, but this time, he saw it. He looked up, his gaze sweeping the room, passing the pilots in the front rows. His eyes found her, in the back, in the shadows. The entire room turned, following his gaze. Every pilot in the squadron was looking at her. There was no smirk, no condescension, no weather girl whispers. There was just waiting, expectancy. Shaw didn't smile. He didn't apologize. He didn't praise her. He was Major Bull Shaw, and he would never do those things. But he broke protocol. "The forecast from Wing is inadequate," he said, his voice flat. He looked directly at Ava. "Captain Rostova, your assessment?" It was not a question. It was a transfer of command. A public, unambiguous deferral. In that single moment, he had validated her, vindicated her, and rewritten the rules of the squadron. He wasn't just asking for the weather. He was asking for her judgment. Eva felt the weight of every eye. The silence was absolute. The trident pin was warm in her hand. Her quiet fortitude had been her shield. Her competence had been her weapon. She hadn't won a shouting match. She had won the war of facts. She stood. Her chair scraped, the sound loud in the quiet room. She walked down the central aisle, her boots striking the plywood floor with a steady, rhythmic thud. She didn't look at the other pilots. She looked at the map. She reached the front. Shaw didn't move, but he shifted his weight, clearing the space at the podium for her. It was the deepest sign of respect he was capable of giving. Eva picked up the laser pointer from the podium. She felt its cool plastic weight. She took a breath. She turned to the map, to the data, to the science. Her science. "Thank you, Major," she said, her voice clear, steady, and filling the room. Now, regarding the 72-hour cyclonic, she was no longer the weather girl. She was Tempest. And the sky was hers. Weeks later, the sky above Kandahar was an endless, aching blue. The storm was a memory. The dust of the desert settled. Captain Eva Rostova, call sign Hog-01, banked her warthog over the peaks of the Hindu Kush. It was a milk run, a routine patrol over Sector Delta. But nothing was routine anymore. The operational review had concluded as quietly as it had begun. There was no court-martial, there was no medal, there was only a thick, classified addendum stapled into her permanent file, a report co-signed by an anonymous commander from SOCOM and Major Shaw. Her tactic, the Doppler-based rain shadow engagement, was now a classified data point, buried in the archives of air warfare innovation, never to be spoken of publicly. She was not a hero. She was not a pariah. She was simply Captain Rostova. She flew over the box canyon. From 10,000 feet, it was just another scar in the earth, peaceful and remote. The violence of that day was invisible, scrubbed clean by the very storm that had enabled it. She thought of the 2 KIAs, the men who had died before her gun had ever spoken. Her victory was not clean. It was stained, bittersweet. It was a salvage, not a triumph. The squadron was different. The change was not in loud congratulations or apologies. It was in the small things. It was in the way Rhino now asked her opinion on pressure systems before a flight. It was in the silence that fell in the briefing room when she stood to speak. A silence of respect, not judgment. They didn't understand her science, not really, but they had seen its consequence. They had learned to trust the data, even when the pilot's eye failed. Her fingers brushed the inside of her flight vest. Under the fire-retardant material stitched into the lining over her heart, she felt the sharp, unmistakable points of the SEAL trident. It was the only report that mattered, the only commendation she would ever need. It was a secret, a heavy, golden truth that she would carry alone. A voice crackled in her helmet. It was Shaw, on the command net from Jagger. "Tempest, Jagger, flight ops are green, but my screen shows some anomalies building over the border. What's the sky look like to you?" It was a simple question, a standard check-in, but it was everything. He wasn't telling her. He was asking. He was deferring to her judgment, not as a box to be checked, but as a primary source of battlefield intelligence. Eva scanned the horizon. The sky was clear, perfect, but she checked her own sensors, her private readings. She saw the subtle drop in humidity, the shift in the wind at altitude. "Jagger, Hog-01, she replied, her voice calm and even. "The sky is clear, sir, for now, but the barometric pressure is unsteady. I'd recommend keeping the fast movers on a shorter leash this afternoon. This air is unstable." A pause. Then Shaw's voice, devoid of sarcasm. "Solid copy, Tempest. Your assessment is logged. Watch your fuel." He trusted her. It was a victory won not with a cannon, but with a barometer. She banked the A-10, the heavy jet feeling light under her control, and pointed the nose toward home. The theme, she realized, was never about the storm. It was about what remained when the storm had passed. True strength was not the roar of the GAU-8, nor the validation of a superior officer. It wasn't the sound of applause or the weight of a medal. It was the quiet, unyielding integrity of the math. It was the internal, unshakable nerve to trust her own data when the entire world was screaming at her to abort. It was the silent, unseen fortitude to make a choice, accept the consequences, and live with the quiet knowledge that her competence, her real competence, had been enough, just once, when it mattered most. She had been just the weather girl. But the weather girl had saved them all, not by changing who she was, but by finally, fully embracing it. And that was the only victory that lasted.